Every time in those first few days that you're breastfeeding, your uterus is contracting as it's supposed to. So then you have pain in your lower abdomen as well. So I was like, there's just pain coming from every part of my body. I'm like, and I had a great labor and delivery. I didn't tear or anything like that. So I can only imagine somebody who had that pain from healing from a wound as well. And then trying, they keep telling you when you're in the hospital, make sure you have a good latch because you're just going to create more damage.
Before we begin, I want to share something special with all of you expecting parents out there. As an internationally board certified lactation consultant, I've seen firsthand how a little planning can go a long way to helping you achieve your baby feeding goals. That's why I'm offering you my free ebook. It's called Birth Practices to Support Breastfeeding, and it's a workbook. So check out the link in the description below. Time and again, I am blown away by the resiliency and hard work that people put into learning how to breastfeed their babies. It's no easy task. It's hard. And that is the same with Rachel, who shares her 3 baby feeding stories. So wherever you are in your baby feeding journey, whether in the prenatal stage and preparing, or you are right in the thick of it, or you're coming close to weaning, or your baby feeding days are long behind you, I want you to take a minute to really think about all the hard effort that you have put in to making sure that your babies have access to human milk. And pat yourself on the back and congratulate yourself for all the hard work you put in. Enjoy this conversation with Rachel Best. Hi, Rachel. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Lo, for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. So before we get into your baby feeding story, why don't you introduce yourself and your family?
So my name is Rachel Best. I am a mother of 3 kids. They're all bigger now. I have an almost 13-year-old, a 10-year-old, and an 8-year-old. Birthed all 3 of them naturally and breastfed them for almost 2 years for each of them. Yeah, it's been a journey.
Yeah. And I think it's really fun to talk to people who the feeding days are a little bit distant, because it's really fun to hear how advice has changed over the years or how things have stayed the same.
Yes.
Sometimes I think, my oldest is 10, and sometimes I think I cannot believe people are still being told X, Y, or Z by their pediatricians.
Yes.
But if we look at the whole history of baby feeding, we can see that these patterns have been going on for a long time.
Yeah, definitely. And, all 3 of my children, now that they're older, have been diagnosed with tongue tie. So my breastfeeding journey, I feel like, wasn't as easy as I anticipated that it would be. You spend so much time preparing for the birth, especially I really wanted a natural delivery. I was birthing in the birthing center at Women and Infants in Providence, Rhode Island, and just thinking, okay, got through the hard part. No,
Right?
I did not. That was the easy part.
Yeah, I have a childbirth ed course, and the focus of the childbirth ed course is on the
Yeah.
postpartum. So we talk about what are the decisions that you're going to make during the birthing process that are going to impact you for weeks and months down the line, and how can you make decisions during the birth that at each decision point is going to lead to the best outcomes
Mhm.
later. Because so much of our focus when we're pregnant is on the
Yes, the
birthing
delivery.
event, which of course it's a huge event in a person's life, and it does take preparation, and it's only the
Yes,
beginning, like you're
yes.
saying.
Yeah, and I had, all great births with all 3 of my children, but I think feeding was more of a challenge, and I had my oldest on a Thursday, and we had Hurricane Irene on Sunday. So,
Oh my
yes, I came home from
goodness.
the hospital Friday, it was a nice, easy delivery, so they let me go pretty quickly, but then on Sunday is when the storm hit, and we lost power for a week. So I just remember lighting candles every night as the sun was setting and crying, thinking, "Okay, I have to not do this by candlelight, I'm gonna be in excruciating pain. Let's just get through this."
Oh,
Yes,
no.
that was brutal, but we did it, and I breastfed him until about 18 months when I was pregnant with my daughter. So,
Uh-huh.
looking back,
So that was with your
that was my
first
thank
child
thank
or
goodness
your
it was my
second?
first. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, taking care of a toddler and a
Yes.
baby with no
Yes, or
power.
2 toddlers and a baby with no
Yeah.
power, but, I mean, I guess I knew what to expect there's pros and cons to every situation, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so I wanna take you back. I wanna hear a little bit more about that, but before we do, I wanna take you actually back to your childhood and ask you what exposure that you had to body feeding or baby feeding as a child. What did you see around you when it came to feeding babies?
I'm the oldest of 3 girls. My sisters are 3 years and 5 years younger than me, and my mom breastfed all 3 of us. So and I was also homeschooled for my early elementary years, so I was around a lot of babies and children and breastfeeding as well.
Oh, that's great. So you just saw it was just a part of
Yes.
life for
Yes,
you.
definitely.
Did that impact how you went into, preparing for baby feeding? Did you already have in mind that you were going to breastfeed no matter what, or did you know that it might be difficult?
I definitely had no idea it could be difficult, which is unfortunate. I wish I'd gone into it being a little more prepared. I feel like as a woman, I can do a lot of hard things, but being prepared for the hard things definitely helps a lot. I think in my late 20s, mid-20s, I was really moving towards a more holistic, healthy lifestyle. So I knew I wanted to do something that was more natural, and that started with giving birth naturally, trying to really avoid an epidural and any medications, and then obviously the natural next step after that is to breastfeed. So I would say that was a huge priority for me, and I was definitely willing to suffer through the pain. I also think I have had a pretty good production, so even though all of 3 of my children were pretty small and petite, minus those first few weeks, I didn't have a lot of pressure from the pediatrician saying, "Weight gain's an issue, you need to supplement." There was never that pressure. In the line of work I am now, I know that a lot of parents get that pressure, and I feel really grateful that I was allowed to just progress and unfortunately suffer through, but did it.
Right,
Did it, we made
yeah.
it.
So, by the time you were having kids, did you have friends who had already had babies that you were close enough to hear their feeding experiences, or were you kind of the first of your
I
friend
was
group?
probably the first of my friend group. I got married in this day and age, it's considered pretty young. I was 22 when we got married, and then I was
Oh,
27 when
yeah.
I had my first. So,
Mhm.
I was didn't really have a lot of friends. My younger sister had a baby when she was very young, so I guess I had my nephew who was 6 at the time, but that was about the only exposure I really had to a friend who had been through it.
Yeah, okay. So you didn't have really personal stories of triumph or frustration when it came to baby feeding that were right
I know
there.
tongue tie runs in my family. My sisters have not been officially diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure they all have tongue ties. So to hear, I asked my mom about it a lot. What was your breastfeeding journey like? And she reports that it was pretty easy, nothing too significant, which is surprising to me, knowing my journey, knowing my sisters and their mouths, how she wasn't in extreme discomfort. Maybe she has a really high pain tolerance. Maybe, I don't know, something went really well for her. And I'm glad for her that that was her story.
Right? I know. I know, especially because when we were kids I was born in '81, and I know that for my mom, there was no help
No,
available
no.
to her. You know, she breastfed all of us for at least a few months, I know, but when her supply kind of tanked, there was nobody to help her navigate that or figure out why it was happening, so then she just switched to formula.
I think too, maybe my mom had a similar situation. They weren't, necessarily at the poverty level, but they didn't have a lot of money. So I think maybe for her having to purchase formula was an option that they weren't really, they wanted to make it work for financial reasons as well. She's never really said that, so to
Mhm.
speak, but just knowing a little bit.
Sure, it was a
Yeah,
factor.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so then it's 15 years ago, you're pregnant. You talked about really wanting to have a holistic approach, and you talked about doing some birth prep. Were you prepping at all for breastfeeding during that time? Did you read any books? Did you seek out a La Leche League meeting? Did you do anything like that during
Not
pregnancy?
so much. I mean, I read all the books. I had a doula who was fabulous, so she really prepared me for that, but no, I think I assumed, like, I'm doing this all naturally, breastfeeding is going to go great. It's gonna be super easy to do, and obviously it was not.
Yeah. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so then you give birth at the birth center. Were you released the same day?
24 hours later.
24 hours. So what kind of support was given to you in the
Um,
hospital
I did
or in the
I
birthing
did get
center?
to work with a lactation consultant all 3 times, but unfortunately, they all just said, "Oh, yeah, everything looks great." So then when I had my 2nd child, I did schedule an outpatient consultation with an IBCLC, a woman and infants, and again, she said everything looks great, her latch was okay, we were transferring enough, just keep going, and I did, and, generally around 8 weeks, it was at least tolerable, not excruciating pain. But I also remember this is a time when YouTube was starting to become more popular and there was more resources available. Sitting there with my toddler, trying to put on a show for him so I could have a few minutes on YouTube to watch other people breastfeed and see, "Okay, what do I need to work on for this latch? Okay, this is what it looks like in this animated video," trying to replicate that and, honestly not achieving great success, but I don't know. I
Yeah, it was the start of having somewhere to go. I don't know how many times I have clients who have been told by somebody, "Your latch
Yeah.
looks great."
Yes.
And I always tell them, "Look, I have seen some latches that look horrible, but baby's transferring well and they are not feeling pain." So in that instance, maybe there is some oral motor function that needs to be worked on, but there's no breastfeeding emergency right at this moment. It's not about what we're seeing. It's about what are you feeling and how is the feeding going and is the infant being nourished? You're the only one who can say if a latch looks good. So often people will ask me, "Does this look good?" And I say, "I don't know. You tell me. How does it feel?" So I don't know why there's this idea that somebody else who is not in the feeding person's body can determine whether or not a latch is good. Now, we have ways of being able to say, is it shallow? Is there enough space between the nose and the breast? Has the nipple been positioned well? Right, exactly. But it's not about just looking and saying, yeah, things look good.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've seen some really even yesterday, I saw a latch that I was like, "You're not in any pain right now?" "Nope." "Oh, okay,
Right.
alright." That looks excruciating, but
It's not
great.
right. I know. Right. We have to let our bodies be the measure of how things are going, our bodies and our babies'
Yeah,
bodies.
female body and the female breast especially are so amazing, and they really adapt in ways that don't seem humanly possible.
Right. I know. And I think often about how we have kept infants alive for all of human history, and other mammals keep their babies alive for all of human history. And it's not about achieving the perfect latch, it's about latching well enough so that baby can transfer enough milk and the mom is not in
Yes,
pain.
yes.
So, when you saw the outpatient, when you went to the and I'm not trying to speak poorly of any other person, because 'cause I'm sure there have been times where I have been off the mark with with clients, and then they had to go get a second opinion and were given the answers they needed. But at that moment, were you saying, "Ah, but it really hurts," or were you just like, "Okay, this must be normal?"
I think I was thinking this must be normal because that's the information I was given, and, you know, at that point, I had just opened my own private practice, finances were pretty tight, all of this stuff costs money. I just remember spending so much time on the phone with the insurance company, like, "How much is this gonna be covered?" And just thinking, "Okay, she's saying it's fine. I'm not going to invest any more money in this. I feel like I'm doing as much research as possible that I can do on YouTube." And, at that point, I had a new moms group I was a part of or I had been with my oldest, so I had that group of friends that continue through subsequent pregnancies and, but also I would say that that sparked a huge interest in me, and it's who I am today because I went through all of that. I've sought so much additional education because if I can prevent somebody else from experiencing that significant amount of pain and really the emotional stress, I still like it's still traumatic thinking about lighting those candles when the sun was setting and just thinking, here we go again. Number one, I'm not going to sleep. Number two, I'm going to be in pain. And number three, I'm going to have to listen to my child screaming while we work on this latch.
This idea of being in like having a hurricane with a newborn baby at home, you didn't have to evacuate or
No, we
anything.
were in East Providence, so not close enough to
Okay.
the coast where it needed to be where we needed to evacuate.
Okay, okay. So you were at home and you were without electricity for a week. Is
Correct.
that right? Is that how
Yep.
long you said? And this I can remember so vividly approaching nightfall with my first when breastfeeding was not going well, and I felt like I could handle anything in the day.
Yeah.
I could put on some Netflix, I could, go to a cafe, I could go out on a walk. Like, there were ways that I could handle my anxiety around feeding, but at night, it felt 10 times
But
worse. Just I felt
without having
trapped.
power too, like, I feel like I'm generally really good at
Yes.
distracting myself, but I didn't have I mean, Netflix I'm not even sure Netflix existed back then, 13 years ago, but
Probably 15 years
I did
ago,
have my
yeah, not or
yeah, I
13
remember
years?
recording
Yeah.
all of these
Uh,
shows that I was like, "I'm gonna sit and, like, watch all these shows while I feed my baby, it's gonna be great." Not having all of the things I planned to have those first few weeks, and then not being able to charge my phone, not being able to charge my Kindle, not having food, like, I pretty much ate an excessive amount of apples and peanut butter because they were shelf stable, and, I feel like paternity leave has come a long way since then. I had the baby Thursday, my husband was off Friday, the hurricane hit Sunday, but he went to work on Monday. So I was home alone, sometimes my family would come by, but they were about an hour away, so, I think, like, one person would come every other day, and then eventually I was like, I can't be without power," and then luckily it came back on shortly thereafter, but yeah, that was a rough week.
yeah, and tell me about the nighttime specifically. What was it difficult for to get the latch established?
Mhm.
Was it that it would take a while to even get her on and sucking?
I think he latched
Or
quickly.
he,
So, yeah,
sorry.
I have a
Mhm.
boy, then a girl, then a boy. So William latched
Okay.
quickly, but very, very shallow, now that I know a little bit more about the latch.
Mhm.
So it was excruciating, and then, every time in those first few days that you're breastfeeding, your uterus is contracting as it's supposed to, so then you have pain in your lower abdomen as well, so I was like, "There's just pain coming from every part of my body." I'm like and I had a great labor and delivery, I didn't tear or anything like that, so I can only imagine somebody who had that pain from healing from a
Mhm.
wound as well, but so then and then trying 'cause they keep telling you when you're in the hospital, make sure you have a good latch because you're just gonna create more damage. So then every time it hurts, trying to unlatch him, which also is painful. I know it's not supposed to be if you do it properly, but I felt like that hurt. So then I was afraid to unlatch him because that was gonna cause more pain, but then I'm having long-term pain from having that shallow latch and that rubbing and sores and bleeding and cracked nipples and the whole 9 yards. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be doing all of that by
Yes.
candlelight
Yeah.
with nobody around you, right? Because that is the big cultural difference from now versus 300 years ago, is that nobody birthed alone and was in the postpartum period alone. You always had, you know, lots of support around you taking care of you. So you were having to take care of yourself and your infant during the day, and I'm sure you had help at night from your partner to some extent, but that's not enough. Just having one other person who's also
Yes, it was
exhausted
working,
isn't
and he
enough.
was working too, so
Right.
I do remember, us changing the diaper at 2 in the morning because, at those early weeks, every time baby feeds, they poop. getting up and having to do all of that by candlelight. And also then, being fearful of, okay, we have to stay up or we have to have candles lit all night long. Like, you know, you're not the most rational person at these early postpartum days thinking, okay, great, now I have a candle lit here. What if I bump it? It hits the curtain, hits the bed. I don't know. It's just endless things to worry about.
Wow. And so you said that pain lasted for about the severe pain lasted for about 8 weeks?
Severe pain, probably just 4 weeks, and then I think the second 4 weeks was tolerable, so I remember being, like, 8 to 10 weeks being like, "Okay, I can do a cradle hold now, I don't need to do this cross cradle and, like, hunched over." I feel a little more confident in his latch now that he's stronger and has a little more control of his head, that I can just hold him in a cradle hold and feel like he's not gonna rip my breast off.
Yeah. And was it the same with your other 2 children? Like, by about the
Exactly.
8-week mark, you felt pretty
Exactly the same,
confident?
it was
Okay.
devastating.
Yeah, that is a long time to be in pain and struggling,
Yes, like,
8
I remember
weeks.
with
I
my
mean
daughter being like, I'm not doing that again, I'm gonna get it this time, I'm gonna get this right away, we're
Uh-huh.
just gonna get through our first few days of difficulty," and then being at, like, week 4 being like, "Well, that was familiar."
Right. And, you think that you know so much by that time, which you do. Somebody who has fed a baby for almost 2 years, they do know a lot. And there's so many ways of problem solving difficulties and so many root causes to breastfeeding pain that when support is not available or not easily accessible, it just makes people feel so much
Yeah, and being
worse.
brushed off, I had a great pediatrician, but being brushed off like, "Oh, yeah, they have a tongue tie, but no big deal." And, as a speech language pathologist, not also having a lot of training in tongue tie at that point in my life and being like, "Okay, everything's fine," but knowing in my gut, like, I shouldn't be hurting this way. Yeah, we did it, it's a miracle. I look back now knowing what I know, and I'm like, "It's a miracle." I'm a determined,
Right.
motivated mother.
Yeah, and so many people go through that, and I always tell my clients, each person has to decide for
Yes.
themselves what is the best decision. Like one person might say, "Yes, I have to do this. It is better for my mental health to just keep pushing through, keep trying to find solutions because I will feel worse if I stop." And other people, they feel like, "You know what? For me, it is better for my mental health, given the situation I am in, to make a different decision at this point, whether that's to go to exclusive pumping or whether to start supplementing." And there's no one right decision because nobody is living the exact circumstances of the person making the decision. There's so much that plays into it. Access to support, family support, work situation, previous mental health status, it's a complicated decision tree for so many people.
Yeah, and I'm thankful that my decisions took me down a road that I could breastfeed for as long as I did for all 3 children, and
Yeah, and you said it was close to 2 years for all 3?
yep, yep, it was a little bit different, so with William, it was about 18 months, and then I was pregnant with my daughter. Genevieve was about the same, and then Xander is my last child, so he was maybe a little bit longer than the first 2 because I didn't get pregnant again, so
Right, exactly. Okay. And is there anything about your stories that you find is significant or would be helpful for other people to hear that you haven't already mentioned before we're going to wrap up? But you are an SLP with a private practice with lots of different types of practitioners, so we'll have a second episode talking a little bit about the work that you do and how you help families coordinate care.
I think the number one thing I would like people to know from my story is, think about your goals and what you really want, and if you're willing to put in the work and the time and the effort, you can achieve it in all aspects of life, but specifically with breastfeeding and parenting. It's hard work, but if it's important to you, take the time and make it happen and seek the support that you need.
Yeah, exactly. The analogy I always make is if you were doing something really difficult in a different part of your life, training for a marathon or studying for a PhD, even when it got really hard, there was nobody that would say, you should just quit."
Yes.
They would say, yeah, this is really hard. You're working hard. How can I support you? At least the people you want in your life,
Yes.
right? And so I always find it interesting that when it comes to mothering tasks like breastfeeding, when it gets difficult, many people, including professionals, will just say, well, just quit.
Yes.
And for some people, that is the answer. They need to hear that. But for other people, being told to quit something that you feel passionately about just because it is taking more work than what you intended is not always the advice that they need
Yeah,
to
and take
hear.
the time to find the friend, the provider, the parent, whoever it might be who will listen to you first before giving you advice, right? Because I also had even my own family saying, You don't have to suffer this way. You can switch to formula or, pump breast milk and feed baby that way," but that wasn't my goal, and like many of us, I'm a very stubborn person. Tell me no, and I'm probably gonna do it twice, not just once.
I know, right? Yeah, it takes that stubbornness to be successful as a woman in 2024.
Yes, definitely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your personal stories, and I cannot wait to discuss baby feeding from a professional lens with you as
Awesome.
well.
Thank you, Lo.
Okay, so 3 amazing stories, including one that took place right after Hurricane Sandy with no power, no access to electricity, eating apples and peanut butter. Come back next week to hear Rachel share her expertise as a speech language pathologist who operates a private practice with lots of different practitioners, including OTs, PTs, IBCLCs, and SLPs, so that you can hear about this collaborative approach to making sure that babies get the best chance they can to improve their oral motor function and have access to breast milk.